which was great and no longer exists. Are you really so sure that nature will fill all the gaps that are being created now quite dramatically, especially in the U.S.? We're talking
I'm glad you know, and I don't think I said that it would fill all of the gaps, but that's a really good example. I worked for the Dallas Times-Herald, and the Dallas Times-Herald died because the Below Company, which owned the competing Dallas Morning News, bought it for $55 million and closed it the next day. The beginning of the death of newspapers began with other newspaper publishers, right, who first of all killed off in most of our cities afternoon newspapers because they weren't profitable enough, and then began killing off each other. So commercial competition was leveling the newspaper population in the United States long before the internet was a factor.
Yeah, and in the U.S., the number of newspapers was reducing steadily through the 20th century before the internet, and the number of newspaper readers was also reducing, but that was expressed by intra-city newspaper wars ending with one victor, mostly. I'll return to this other point. Let me start with, by asking you all, this is a very friendly to journalism panel. And as I mentioned, returning to my opening joke, in the US, if you go to a panel with the title Media and Democracy, typically there won't be many journalists at that panel. And what you will hear is a much more hostile view of journalism. So I want to first ask all of you, whoever wants to jump in first, just to defend journalism a little more against some more specific challenges. This is the kind of thing one hears at these conferences. I'll leave out what I would consider the less good arguments and make the more good arguments. Journalists congratulate themselves a lot, as Paul noted, but in fact are not actually producing a lot of new information. If you were to look in a rigorous way at the net product of journalism, however you want to define that, professionalized journalism, you would find an enormous amount of replication of effort. You'd find an enormous amount of things that don't rise to the level of public importance. You would find a decent amount of actual misinformation or misleading information. And conversely, the internet, by lowering the barrier to entry to zero, makes it possible for independent voices in a widely distributed production network to produce this kind of material. To state it in the baldest way, but one hears this sometimes at these conferences, what kind of information that is valuable wouldn't we have if all of journalism simply disappeared, but we still had the internet and the platform it provides to a very wide variety of people?
Well, we wouldn't have the professional discipline of journalism, of reporting. And if you look at what appears, at least in the United States, online, most of what appears in the blogs and other sites is traceable back to the original reporting that comes out of the traditional media, out of newspapers and to some extent radio and television. And it's the drying up of that fountain, of that source, that is really under threat. And volunteer citizen journalists are a good thing. I'm not against them at all, and I'm glad there's greater variety of commentary and analysis online. But it's that original reporting that doesn't seem to be reproduced. There doesn't seem, at this point, to be a successful business model for that online. Maybe it will be created. I don't think we've seen the end of these developments, and I'm not predicting a tragedy. I think there's a risk of a real decline. We've already seen in the United States a significant decline, a loss of certain kinds of reporting that are an important discipline, just of the kind that that Bodo Hombach was telling about exposing corruption at state and local levels. That kind of reporting is drying up in my own state, and so that is the kind of thing that I'm worried about when that we're going to lose.
Did you want to come in on this, Bodo? Or?
Yeah. Yeah, das würde ich gerne.
Yes, I would love to respond to that. And I would also like to bridge the gap between the discussion that we've had at the other end over there about this metaphor. Is it an optimistic or a pessimistic view regarding the change of media? I personally think that for a long, long time we had a cohort of printers that were used to print media with ink on white paper, and they are aging alongside that paper. And then another group has grown up to be a digital native, and therefore they look at the computer and they will, unfortunately, I think, no longer turn to paper at all. I mean, there are a whole phalanx of students who do a fantastic job with their studies, but they no longer have books at home. They don't have a library. They just look at their screen. I don't understand it. My own kids aren't very interested in paper. I mean, even if they have physical information, they're reading it on their laptop, and they can't understand that. I don't find that a lot fresher and better and different. Well, I think still that I see things differently. I used to wear a different hat one time as a Minister for Traffic and Transportation in my country, and there was a lethal crisis at the time, and that was the crisis of watchmaking, because wristwatches, I mean, any watch shrank to wrist size, and we said, God, clockmaking is dying. I mean, factories got ripped out. I mean, I personally had a watch that was blinking along, but I now have an analog wristwatch back. I mean, wristwatches, or those proper clocks, wristwatches above all, did not die. I mean, they're the best advertisement bearers for magazines. I mean, the analog system is still there, even if you have a quartz ticking at the background. So we then had the crisis that the great Bill Gates already proclaimed the end of print media for 2000. And what we really had was a structural adjustment crisis, no more, no less. And I think that is what we're in now, an adjustment crisis. And it doesn't just hit us who are making media, designing media, but I think the same as, you know, when radio came up, everybody said, oh, this is the end of any newspapers. And then TV came and everybody said it was the end of all radio. I think media are going to cooperate, and I think they're going to go through a process of consolidation and convergence that we think is impossible to imagine right now. There are already first approaches, though, that are attractive, also in journalistic terms. I think we in the publishing houses will find it really difficult to offer both things at the same time on the same level. So print for the older ones and online and digital offers for the younger ones. It's going to be tough. But I think that the generation that is so determined by the free of charge generation, young generation, they are the ones that now have their iPhone, they have their apps on there, and they are noticeably ready to pay for quality there. I mean, quality offers with apps for iPhones or new smartphones are accepted. And I think there is an increasing market in there. And I personally am firmly convinced that this process of coexistence, and that's then what brings me to the question about journalism. Journalism, that comes home to one point. Average journalism is too expensive for freebie papers and too bad for sale. So I think what we need is journalistic excellence. Journalistic excellence that is going to be of relevance for our readers. and they will work on this jungle of news to prepare what is really important for our readers, give our readers orientation in this jungle of news that we're faced with today. I mean, media expected to take position, not so much in party political terms, but when it is about the general welfare of people. So at a time where the bearers of welfare, economic circles, political circles, lose accountability and credibility, the media are more and more expected to clearly show what general welfare interests are, what the public good is. And I think that is an important role for the media, for print as well. And that's why I think quality journalism is going to be more in demand, not less. And there's another point where years ago people told me that I didn't understand the world because I didn't have all this information about plastic islands in the oceans, or that I hadn't understood about September the 11th. I mean, I think today people say it's difficult to find truth on the web, because at one point in time people notice that life is short and that lifetime is really valuable, and then people begin to notice that they don't want to waste it, and that is when they then start wanting the news that they read to be true and relevant for them. And that is why I believe in high quality journalism as a future product that will be in demand, but also as an economic, as a business factor. And one last point that I find really important, if I may, just quickly. A democracy that is not a society based on dialogue, a society where dialogue is not firmly rooted as a phenomenon, cannot work. I think it's based on convictions, on convincing people about the right way to go, or the appropriate way to go. And that is where I see an important role for the media for the future, because we in Germany at the moment experience a lot of crises, party crisis, political party crisis, etc. We've been talking about that and lamenting it for 20 years, but that people no longer believe in institutions, processes and procedures. That is a new degree of frustration, and that is where media have a very important role of organizing this. Otherwise, we'll be in deep trouble.
Just to press on one thing before we go over to the other side, I think I heard you disagree with Ezio in implying that you're more agnostic, as long as the news organization exists, you're more agnostic about whether it has to deliver its product in the form of a physical newspaper or newsprint. Have I heard that right?
Ja, Sie haben mich erwischt.
There you caught me out. Caught in the act. I'm a manager, and I obviously have to decide, am I one of those who know what the future will bring, and therefore do I pave the way of the house in that very direction, or do I do it differently? And I have taken a decision here. It may be the wrong one, but that's what I've decided. I've decided to say, I don't know what the consumer will want out of me tomorrow, what tomorrow's consumer will want. That is why we're no longer defining ourselves as a newspaper house, even though we have 56 more important newspapers all over Europe. We're no longer saying we're a printing house, we're saying we're a manufacturer of journalism. Right. And we're offering all theoretical and practical possibilities of what journalism could look like in the future. We've got development departments for all of these avenues, and we are preparing for all of them. We don't want to be the first in anything, because that's bloody expensive, but we're waiting what the market will want and to try to be prepared that we can deliver journalism to wherever people want it, even if it is on their smartphones. We're practicing that at the moment.
Okay. Next conference, we can discuss whether, if I could demonstrate that everybody already knows what time it is, it's still important to have a watch industry, but we'll save that for later. Do you all want to add on the question I asked?
Yeah, I do, actually. We've taken to calling ourselves around the New York Times platform agnostic. I personally confess to being not platform agnostic. I grew up on printed newspapers, and I love them, and I like the tactile sense of them. I like the serendipity that you get by seeing happening across a headline on a subject you didn't even know you were interested in. But as the editor of a newspaper, I've become much more platform agnostic. I really don't care an awful lot whether my children choose to read